Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time today. I know it's probably been a long day so far, but I'm excited to be joined by this austere group of investors on the panel here. A lot of different backgrounds presented and different approaches to investing. We're going to start, Anil, with coming out of the pandemic. Where have you been seeing the opportunity and the impact of the pandemic in terms of your investment approach?
Very interesting, Serge. Good afternoon, you all. I think tough panel after lunch, but we'll try to see how many of you we can make sleep properly. So pandemic, actually restricted mobility. And even before pandemic, we had been investing on, businesses which were either tech-enabled or were leveraging the digitization. And then happened pandemic, and the businesses which were more dependent on people connect, had tough time. But incidentally, our portfolio, started performing well because they didn't had a problem of reaching out to people. So, digitization really helped. What I'm seeing now, more and more people are, adopting or leveraging technology so that, they can be relevant, they can be in touch with consumer. And that's what I see going forward.
Thank you.
So just to set the context, we work with SaaS startups, and we are a business accelerator. So we work with SaaS startups, and we also fund the SaaS startups. The reason I wanted to give you this context is to his question on the pandemic. As we all know that a lot of things have been turned upside down through the pandemic, and for SaaS startups specifically, this has been actually a driver for growth, and we find that it has been a tailwind because in SaaS, one of the challenges that India SaaS startups were having was how do they have meetings with global customers. And today what is happening is that the pandemic has actually made it more easy. People have actually made this a part of their workflow process where people are ready to meet, take appointments on Zoom. And actually today we are finding that startups are able to close large deals sitting in India, through Zoom calls. This has not happened before the pandemic, so we see this as a huge opportunity for investment into SaaS companies where people are trying to not just address the India market, but also global in nature.
Yeah. So at Reliance, actually, we accelerated our investments during the whole pandemic period. In fact, a lot of investments were done pretty much, a lot of the diligence was done all remotely, and for access, actually, we didn't even meet a lot of the founders that went through the market access program. So it was an interesting period, but as a corporate, I think our investment thesis and our approach to investing in startups has not changed pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. I think it all depends on the opportunity that is available to us as a corporate, and what is the valuation, etc.
Just to follow that up, I think one question that I used to have to think about a lot when I was trying to do startups years ago is what's the black box behind the decision making? What do I need to show a VC in order to get them to write me a check? Maybe if each of you could take a few minutes to kind of peel off that veneer that's there and the mystery, and help these guys understand what do they need to do to show you that you'd be interested enough to take the next step in terms of evaluating them as an investment opportunity.
So interesting stuff, like, Amey has said they made a lot of investment during pandemic, and the entire diligence were done remotely. I think digital was the play. I think with this connected world, it's easy to, get background check and other stuff. We who primarily invest in early stage company, we don't have much to see. In many cases the product is also in making, right? So tough to make out, what would be the outcome, tough to make out, on technology. The only thing which, we can look at is the, composition of team, right? For us, the biggest, challenge is to get hold of right team, because 90% of the time we have seen, business changes. Very rarely you will see, people, do what they start, right? They will keep, evolving. In fact, we have one company, ClueTrack, which was also part of, Peka's program. When we invested in them, of course, they wanted to be on big data side. But today, the way company have evolved, it is mainly on, real-time brand analytics. Right now, when you're doing business all online, you need to know what people are talking about your brand and real time, right? So the way, they morphed, and of course they took a lot of help from, other stakeholders. It's very important, for us to get hold of, right team. So we, spend a lot of time, identifying the, founders, what complementary skill sets they bring on the table, whether, they can be replaceable with each other or not, whether, they have, potential to build team or not, can they scale or not, right? Whether they themselves can sell their product or not, right? Many times we have seen they, build wonderful product. In fact, I remember investing almost, I think more than 1.5 decade back, invested in a, super genius guy, built 150 IPs, and to our surprise, not a single product was commercialized, right? So business ultimately shut, we couldn't do anything, but, genius, but could never sell a product, right? So it's very important, for us to, get hold of good team. So maximum time we spend is on team. I'm sure my other...
No, completely agree on the team. When we wear the investor hat and look at making investments into startups, one of the things that we really look for is clarity of thinking. What perspectives are the founders bringing to their vision, right, of their startup? Because many a times, as investors, we may not know as much as what the startup founders know. The mistake that we see that startup founders do is they do a brain dump or a brain squeeze and try to present everything in technical terms, jargons, etc. Right? But we are looking for people who have a clarity of thinking, passion to what they are doing, because this entrepreneurial journey is actually a marathon, not a sprint. So we want people who understand that they're not just doing it for quick money, or they're not just doing it as a job, but they actually are passionate about doing it. So that's the second thing that we do look at. Third thing is the problem value itself, right? Because just like they say in real estate, location, 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 we believe that if the problem value is not identified clearly, because a lot of entrepreneurs, again, we see the mistake that they make is they build the technology and then chase after the problem. Right? So we want to see clarity in terms of the problem value, how important that problem is, and to whom it is important for, right? These are the three main things that we look for.
Yeah, so as a business house, one of the things that we look at is whether we are able to use the technology that has been built by the company, and can it be scaled. And these are two important points, because in the course of actually trying out these technologies, we also end up building a relationship with the founders as well. So to give you an example, there's a company in the warehouse automation space, and we gave them a pilot of 7-8 warehouses, and they were able to do it at 1/3 the cost of foreign competitors at a certain amount of scale. So the value proposition was very clear. We ended up taking a majority stake in the company, and that company has very recently got a $1 billion contract as well from us. So we are almost 30-40% of the revenue before they got this contract. So those are the kind of winning propositions that we look for. The entrepreneurs have to play for the long run. We very often see entrepreneurs are very short-sighted in terms of trying to sell something and just letting it be in auto mode. It's not that. With large enterprises, you have to build a relationship, you have to go deep, you have to go wide, and you have to play for the 10-year, 15-year game, and it's not really about selling something and getting out.
I just want to emphasize the point that all three gentlemen up here have made. I'll put it in very simple terms. A lot of entrepreneurs, particularly tech entrepreneurs or engineering entrepreneurs, start with the what before the why. And then they try to figure out the why later. I can't emphasize that enough. Whether that's at MIT, whether that's at IIT, the same problem persists. There's very smart people who think they have a great idea, they can build something, and then they wake up one morning and they say, who's going to buy this? And if you don't have that process flipped, then you're going to spend a lot of time in aggravation in life and you're not going to get money. So maybe each of you, I know you each spend a little bit of time on what entrepreneurs do badly or things they make mistakes on when they're pitching you. That would be helpful for this group maybe as well. Mistakes they can avoid when they're trying to come to you for capital.
Okay, so I think I'll add few, and I'm sure my friends will add more. I think, as I told you, and it was very eminent from my friends as well, that we lay a lot of emphasis on founding team, right? And many times we see that founders miss highlighting the strength of team. I think you don't have to spend a lot of time. As today, the span of time for any investor is maybe 30 seconds, 3 minutes, and then it may go for an hour or so. So if you're not able to get attention of your investor in first 3 minutes, it's a waste opportunity. So certainly I think you need to highlight strength of your team, why you are so special, who working on this venture. Second, you need to be very clear what problem you're working on. Right, many a time it takes a lot of efforts for investor to understand what are you actually trying to do, right? So be very clear, be very specific, why you are solving a problem, and to solve that problem, what solution you have built, right? Is this solution backed by IP, right? Do you have a moat? Why you, why not others? What kind of competition you are going to face, both direct and maybe indirect, and also how big is the market, right? Normally investors are different kind of investors. There are some who definitely want to support on your initiative, but if you're looking for institutional money, they will only come if it's a very big market, right? A big market to serve, which offers you scope to scale. Unless until you're able to show that scale, most of the time investors will not look at your venture. So team, problem, solution, market, and I'll stop here because I'm sure Shekar and Amey will also have a lot to share. What or how do you think to give exit to your investor, right? Because any investment is made with an objective to get a return on investment. So unless until you have thought through the path to exit, maybe it could be acquisition or maybe IPO. Every entrepreneur dream for IPO, but not everyone get listed, right? But certainly there are opportunity to merge, there are opportunity to get acquired. So most of the time we find that entrepreneur gets so married to his venture that he is reluctant to even speak about merger or acquisition, and if that is the only possibility for like I invested in a company and we got stuck dead for almost 10 plus years, right? Had there had not been this opportunity, I would have never got exit in that venture, because whenever we would bring somebody on table, entrepreneur will ensure that he'll bring some point and the merger will not happen, right? So these are the few points which are very critical. I think you should keep in mind. The opportunity of window is very small, right? If you are not able to grab the attention of your investor in first 30 seconds and then 3 minutes, then probably you will not get their attention ever. So try to be crisp, be number backed, and since you have started, I think you are the master of your business, so do best.
Yeah, all well said by Anil, right? So maybe a slightly different part of the business I can focus on. Most of us, in India, we happen to be engineers who start, do startups. Most of us, right, in general. And we have to admit that we are not really very good at positioning the opportunity to an investor. So you have to think of it as the investor is going to write a check, and he has to believe that that opportunity is right? The treasure island is what we call it. And the journey to that treasure island, who is coming with you, right, is also something important, which is the team part that he was talking about. What we find, because you were asking about what are the mistakes that they make, right, and what they should be avoiding, is what we find is that as more of engineering background based entrepreneurs come in, when they're trying to position to the investor, they're positioning more about how they look at it from a product point of view, feature point of view, rather than looking at it from a customer point of view. So it is easier to communicate the value to the investor if you can actually help understand, what is your product solving, what is your product doing from a customer's point of view. Whereas we always find that, there's a magic quadrant is put in, the XYZ features have been added, which is different from this product, etc. But nowhere that positioning of that opportunity and positioning of what is important to the customer and how you are solving it is coming out, right? So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think, so I'm getting the maximum time to think through answers, but one of the things that I see often is that for technical presentations, founders send the non-technical sort of sales co-founder or business executive to make that presentation, and that's a huge mistake because you have a technical audience and then you have a salesperson actually talking to that audience, and it really doesn't go down that well. The best way I've seen is the person who's built a product, could be the CTO or the CEO, should actually demo the product instantly. A 3 to 5 minutes demo is much better than a 2-3 minutes pitch or even a 10 minutes pitch through a PowerPoint deck. And that's the way to convince at least an investor like us that you know your chops, right? That's the first thing I would say. And secondly, you have to be able to teach something new to the audience. If you come and you tell me the same thing that I've heard 10 times, and it's not your fault that I've heard it 9 other times, but it's just that, we would lose interest very quickly. So if you're able to teach me something new, I think that, will certainly grab our attention and take the conversation to the next level.
I'll add a couple of more things in interest of, I think there are many students here. So when you're pitching, definitely as an investor, we are interested in knowing, whether competition is there or not. And 99% time we hear there is no competition, right? So, and trust me, the nature of business we are in, we have already seen, 3 more, pitches like yours. So certainly there is a competition. It's very rare that, you will not see competition. So please do your homework. Second, what you're asking, it's very important to, make it clear, like what you're asking, why you're asking, and what value prop you are, thinking for your enterprise. Most of the time, I've seen founders are unprepared, and, the numbers what they bring on table, go really off roof. And even if you sold your story right, as Amey has said, you will put us off only because, you don't understand number. And if an entrepreneur or a businessman don't understand number, it's tough for us to write a check, right? So do your homework. I think you may be great innovator, but if you're building a business, you also need to be a good businessman, right? So these are a few more inputs we'd like to give.
Just to follow that up, if somebody who feels strong technically, but they just don't have the management, business, finance skill set, and they think they need to reach out for a co-founder, maybe each of you can speak about what that process should look like, how they would evaluate that. I hear that question a lot. How do I think about co-founder? How's that relationship look? Sometimes people get carried away with 10 co-founders, so maybe talk a little bit about that in terms of guiding this audience.
May you want to start?
Okay. So I think ideally, I mean, there should be a combination of sales and technology in a team. But at least from our perspective, what we are looking for is talent and technology, access to talent and technology and innovation. So we're okay if the business talent isn't great, because we could be the ones, the platform that could take that business to the next level and could groom that entrepreneur to take it to the next level. What is a must for us is the technical depth of the solution that you're selling to us. Having said that, it certainly helps if the founder is business savvy, is sales savvy. I met Hemant a while back. He has a platform called Colpol, which is also one of the partners here at this event. And they have partnered with Jio, and he's an excellent sales guy. He's been able to engage with all the key stakeholders in our organization and look at all opportunities available, and it's just incredible. And he understands the product well, he has a vision, and he's able to sell his solution quite well. So I think that's a winning combination, but that's my personal thinking on this.
Yeah, we think this is based on the business. So business opportunity that the entrepreneur is going after. So in cases where it is very deep tech oriented, and the way you're accessing your customer is more in terms of technology channels. For example, India is becoming a very hotbed for developer tools, right? So when you're doing these kind of opportunities where you're doing developer tools, etc., maybe even AI based things, ML based things, etc., having the founder be deep tech, tech oriented is very important for us. We'd love to have a co-founder which is actually sales and marketing, complementary skill, but that is not important in those kind of things. In other kinds of businesses which are not this, where it's not deep tech oriented, or it's not in the developer tool community, etc., then we need to have the main co-founder, the founder, be business oriented. The other important thing that we look for is even if the founder is a tech-based person, or if the person is actually a non-tech based, what is important is to be able to have the ability to build teams, which means at some point they should be able to say, hey, I don't have to necessarily be sitting and coding. I will be able to delegate this to somebody. I will bring in someone who has a complementary skill set. So this team building becomes actually a very important capability for the founder that we look for.
It's very important, right? If you have to start, you certainly need a good co-founder. I don't know, there are a lot of college students. I don't know if you wish, you may not raise your hand, but boys, how many of you have a girlfriend? or girls, how many of you have a boyfriend, right? Okay, you can choose not to answer, but to make it simple, the entrepreneurship, especially, it's an arranged Indian marriage, right? As in the morning, Mr. Deshpande, categorically said it's a lonely journey. You need a good partner, right? If you don't have a good partner, sometime, and this journey is quite, topsy-turvy. Sometimes you will have highs, you will have lows, My friends, spoke more about, investor on board. It doesn't matter, right? In like statistics says only 3 and 4% of the people get funded. That means 97 or 96% of the business, still get built without investment, right? So, whatever side you are, you need a good partner, right? So, I'll share my story. When I started my fund, of course, I had a lot of thoughts. I could have, walked alone the aisle, and then, the moment I moved out of my active professional life, many guys approached me, and I was also in hurry to get started. So I partnered with, 2 more guys, and we split business, one third, and since, I was the only free because the other 2 guys had their, other day jobs. So I was doing heavy lifting. I was the one who was investing. I was the one, who was doing all, documentation. And then I realized during the process that it is only me, who's, driving the things, and we are in the business of investment. We, approach investors, and investors ask about, you and your team, as we ask, entrepreneurs. And I realized that I'm alone, right? So I started looking for, one more person, who could, be with me. And then I met my current partner, and then we started, doing brainstorming, and then we realized that, it's better to have, live and, complementary partners. So we had to ask, the other two partners to leave, right? We took a call. So yes, though I say it's a, arranged Indian marriage, but if you have to take a divorce, please take a divorce, because you are in a business to build a business, right? So you can't, live with someone, who is not adding value. If I am giving my 100%, I at least expect my partner to give, if not more, at least, matching, and then only, we can be complementary, right? So it's a topsy-turvy journey. You will see highs, you will see lows, and you need good partner, right? Like highs, you'll have so many people to share the joy, but when you're low, you will only find solace in your partner. So it's very important to look for a partner with whom you can at least, look to spend good 7, 8, 10 years.
Thank you, Albie. So the title of this session was Decoding 2023 for Investment. What you've just heard is timeless in terms of advice. It's not necessary whether it's 2023, 2021, 2001. These are the components, the things you need to do in order to build a successful business. You may need to titrate your business towards the current market circumstance. Well, that will come through your market research and your alignment of team. So one key takeaway I think everyone should have is that don't look at whether it's this year or that year. Everything you've just heard will build a successful recipe for as well as you possibly can. Number one, to raise money and then be successful in building your business. Maybe we can just switch to one topic that has been a challenge, and not a challenge, but just also an opportunity, which is how do we think about allocating capital toward Bharat opportunities? And how can this audience think about that in terms of if they're just working on Bharat in the rural sector and rural opportunities, how should they position themselves toward institutional venture capitalists?
There are two questions in there, right? The first thing is, I'll say that the new mantra is actually capital efficiency. Because until now, capital was pretty easy to come by from an investment perspective, and we found, startups of, wanting to grow at any cost, which means not necessarily profitability, right? So I think one important thing that is coming is capital efficiency. And why this is related to his question is that India inherently is capital efficient when compared to many other places, right? And that is the reason why today when people are talking about the next decade being driven by technology in India, the decade revolution, we're talking about this. Basically, you're going to see a lot of entrepreneurs come out of any place in India, right? This is because today you are able to do entrepreneurship from any place. Remote working is also something that is easy for people to do now. I see it as this capital efficient nature that is a must. Also is going to promote rural based thinking. The market in India itself is very large. Unlike in a couple of other startup nations, we've seen like Israel and others where you have to always be global first. Here we see that in India the market itself is very large. That is also going to help rural entrepreneurship a lot more. The fact that the last thing I want to touch upon is the technical diffusion. So what we're finding is when ChatGPT is being released in West Coast in the US, within 2 months you have use cases solving rural problems through chatbots using ChatGPT, right? So this is something that Satya Nadella was talking about called the technology diffusion has increased so much. So we find that the next decade where it's going to be technology enabled is going to actually help a lot more in terms of rural based entrepreneurship, and we will see India having a lot more of this.
Yeah, so I think 2 points. One is that as an entrepreneur, you need your customer to have that paying propensity for you to build a sustainable business model. And that paying propensity will increase over a period of time. Honorable Prime Minister has said that we will reach $5 trillion economy. And once that happens, automatically you will see a new wave and class of consumers who would be more savvy, according to me, than what we are seeing today. Secondly, as digital payments and 5G and all this stuff goes out and goes into all our sort of cities and towns across the country, consumers will have access. They will have access to content. They will have access to. They'll be able to do transactions. They'll be able to make choices for themselves. And as that happens, obviously, the markets will be unlocked. And so, as entrepreneurs, I think, and I'm really impressed to see what we're seeing out here in Hubballi, that quietly away from the noise, entrepreneurs are going about building a sustainable model. And I think we need to see more of that. I really like the quiet and the peace that entrepreneurs have out here. Lots of great infrastructure. The hotel that we are staying in is absolutely awesome. So much space that you can't get to see that in crowded cities like Mumbai, Pune, etc. So why does one actually, as an entrepreneur, want to be in those cities anymore? In crowded, polluted cities, you can build whatever you want to build from here and access those markets one way or the other. And we can see Anil and Shekar and a lot of other interesting investors have come all the way to Hubballi to access all the entrepreneurs out here. So I think that's really encouraging.
I'll add a few points, Serge, if you allow me, right? Like before panel, we were discussing about, India has changed a lot. And probably, I'm, one of few, early, entrant in this space, probably who have seen 2 decades plus in this industry. And when I started, the only 2 cities we had in mind was Bangalore, Bombay, of course, and then, Delhi NCR started picking up because of e-commerce. That these were the only 3 cities where we would travel and we would make investments, right? But India has changed a lot in the last 10 years, right? While I think nobody in this room liked, pandemic, we all were locked down, but trust me, this, pandemic did too many good things for India, right? The penetration of digitization, actually has moved India 5 years ahead. What we should have in year 2028, we are today, right? So India has progressed a lot, right? Second, before pandemic, like we as an investor, simple example, if entrepreneur says, I have my business in Hubballi, the first reaction for me would be, no, it's not possible, right? Let's not waste time. But pandemic actually made everybody, aware that yes, business can be done, from any place. Like most of my friends ran their business out of Goa, right? Otherwise, every single flight which goes to Bangalore, we'll find some of them, but they ran their business for almost 1.5 years sitting in Goa. Some people in Lonavala, beautiful hill station. They enjoyed the monsoon. So one thing is very clear, I think location doesn't matter. The way, state governments and central governments have promoted entrepreneurship, yes, tier 2, tier 3 cities are happening. In fact, as a fund, our 60% of investments are in non-metro. We do have our share of investment in Bombay and Bangalore, but we have investments in Cochin, Trivandrum, we have investment in Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, Pune, Jaipur. Now we are doing one investment in Bhubaneswar, right? So yes, entrepreneurship is there to stay, and as Shekar rightly said, India actually it's a very large captive market. The need of Hubballi is different than need of Bangalore. So you certainly have large market and you can tweak it. Now talking about investors, right? Trust me, we are all sharks. You are very hungry. If you are building good business here, trust me, you will find everybody coming to Hubballi or going to Dharwad or going to Patna. Doesn't matter, as long as you're building good business, don't worry about investors, you will find them.
Just just to add to his point, when the data had come out that there were 100 unicorns in India that were created just in a particular time frame, we did a quick study, the team, and we found out that of the 100 unicorns, the founders of those unicorns, half of them came from small towns and non-IITs and non-IIMs. Right, and this space is increasing. So I think if you can keep seeing that, that's certainly going to change everything.
So maybe let's just wrap up in 1 minute on your final closing thoughts for the audience.
Start with Amey.
I think I'm really encouraged by seeing all the amazing stuff that entrepreneurs are building here. Reliance as an ecosystem is open to all of you. Let's try and find a winning formula to build something at scale.
I think the entrepreneurship, Indian entrepreneurship is looking very, very bright. We find that, just like how all the panel members have been talking about, the opportunity is very huge. The playing field is now level, right? You can build business sitting anywhere. Talent is in huge supply, right? People are coming out from different colleges. The good things that Deshpande and Deshpande Foundation is doing in terms of skilling and being able to get people skilled in rural areas is actually only fueling to this growth, right? So my closing thoughts is that entrepreneurship is bright. This is a good time for entrepreneurs to think about their startups, realize their vision. Maybe you need to make sure that you have the right mentors, or at least within your peers, somebody to work with and not be that lonely founder. And I think you should be able to create a good business if you follow some of the fundamentals.
So India is actually changing and is happening. Right? I'll not talk much, but if I see from my eyes, I see next 10 years is India's year. And we'll see, a lot of innovative ideas will come from India, and will not be restricted to metros, but we'll see very, very, like who would have thought, I don't know how many of you were there in the morning, but who would have thought, a defense startup would come out of Hubballi, right? They are, building, probably India's first, company, which is, building, semi-automatic rifles and guns and, defense mechanism. So we will see a lot of, good stuff from India. I strongly believe, and I'm seeing those things happening, right? Most of the time, we would have seen, and I'm sure Serge would have seen more that, we go always, out of India to raise money. I saw, remarkable change that guys from different countries are not named, but coming to India to raise money to invest their part of the country, right? This is the reverse thing we are happening. So India certainly, being very large captive market. Ours is a developing country. We all need, a lot of, good stuff to happen. The purchasing parity power have changed. It's growing, right? Stability in government and the way, infrastructure is developing. I think, the next 10 years, looking quite good. If anybody is sitting here on fence, whether I should start or not, I think today is your day. Please get started. Don't, have, that one thought in mind, had I started. I think please go ahead and get started. The worst will happen, you will fail, but this failure will give you a lot of, learnings. Investors, I think if you are ignoring this space, you are ignoring at your own peril. Thank you.
Over the last six months or so, I have seen probably 2 or 3 dozen U.S. trained either entrepreneurs or investors coming back to India now to start businesses, and that's not an anomaly. That's a trend because they know where the money is and they know where the opportunity is. Last thought, I have a good friend of mine who runs a $2 billion hedge fund in Hong Kong, and family had suggested they want to meet him, and he looked at me and he said, Serge, why do they want to talk to a Chinese manager when the world is going to be India's in 20 years from now? So, with that, thank you, gentlemen.